Aloha. Just to let you know I'm a little hot right now, so if I get a little sweaty or glistening, I apologize. Don't hate my shine. But we got Garrison Hayes here talking about his DEI, the modern slur.
Over the last week, it has become abundantly clear that when President Donald Trump and his allies use the term DEI, they mean it as a slur, primarily against black people, but they are absolutely willing to include your group too.
DEI is gone. DEI is a crime.
On DEI and the claims that you've made, are you saying this crash was somehow caused and the result of diversity hiring?
We want somebody that's psychologically superior.
Now, black people have been saying this for quite some time, that certain terms are being weaponized against us, terms that may on the surface seem neutral, but are ultimately
Thug, DEI, CRT, all of them mean the new N-word.
Not neutral at all.
They called you, some critics did, the DEI mayor.
We know how ridiculous that is.
They are, in a very real sense, slurs, but for the sake of clarity, I'll be calling them modern slurs, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. But in order to truly understand the way that modern slurs work, you have to talk about the slur of all slurs in America, the word nigger.
Well then, get away from the door.
This is the rise and hopefully fall of the modern
What was
slur.
that?
Let's dig in. This video is sponsored by Ground News. More on that later. I made a full video on the N-word that you should absolutely watch next, but I want to revisit this word from a different perspective. A question that I've had for some time is why the N-word is so bad. I know how it made me feel when bigots online or on video games or in person have used it against me. But the question is, how did this word, this slur, come to be so particularly infamous in America? Well, the answer is actually very simple. It was intended to be that way. A little backstory. And I'm gonna go ahead and warn you that I will be saying the N-word a lot in this video.
Why is this word used so frequently?
So go ahead, just brace yourself, turn the volume all the way up. You know, in public, no headphones.
I've used it. Nigga. Yeah, you know, nigga, please. Nigga. You know, can you lend a nigga a pencil?
Etymologists believe that the word nigger was derived from an English word neger that was itself derived from negro, the Spanish word for black, as in the color. And I think this is important because the word did not have a negative connotation originally. We're going to come back to that a little bit later. This word was at one time across multiple cultures, spellings, and pronunciations simply a descriptor of an African person, a person with darker brown skin. We can have a deeper conversation about whether or not black was even the appropriate term to call these folks who are very obviously brown, but this is coming from a group of people who began to call themselves white. So color perception was not their strength. But according to Randall Kennedy, by the late 1830s, the term had become a familiar and influential insult, a slur. We actually know this because in 1837, Hosea Easton, a free black man in New England, was one of the first intellectuals to write about the word this way. He said, is an opprobrious term employed to impose contempt upon black people as an inferior race. The term itself would be perfectly harmless were it used only to distinguish one group from another, but it is not used with that intent. It flows from the fountain of purpose to injure. And this is the key. The word was at one point just a descriptor, but through an intentional effort to make it something else, it became the N-word that we know today. The history of this word is bloody. To be a is to, in the mind of the bigot, deserve dehumanization, lynchings, terrorization, bombings, mob violence. For the white racist and those that love them had this coming.
What white people have to do is try to find out in their own hearts why it was necessary to have a nigger in the first place. Because I'm not a nigger, I'm a man. But if you think I'm a nigger, it means you need it. The question you got to ask yourself, the white population of this country has got to ask itself, if I'm not the nigger here, and you invented him, you the white people invented him, then you got to find out why.
But as they do, times changed. The success of the civil rights movement meant that being overtly bigoted wasn't okay anymore. The use of terms like in this new polite society would get you fired, require an apology tour, and mark you as a person outside of the mainstream for the rest of your days.
So like what he's talking about is nothing new. This is going to be Lee Atwater talking about the same thing, I think in the 60s, maybe 70s. 81, there you go. He was one of Reagan's strategists.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts you, backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now. You're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things. And the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger, you know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
And so if you were alive today, he'd say, you know, now we use DEI, CRT, thug, things like that. But they've been doing this forever.
Kind of.
I is what I is, and I'm not changing.
And as a result, I think that people started to believe that racism was either a thing of the past or something that would altogether die off once all the old, stuck-in-their-ways bigots went to their grave.
That's crazy. I'm 45 years old. When I was young, like, the N-word was like my nickname. I got called that so much. It's crazy.
Which is a nice idea, quaint even. But that isn't how the world works. Racist ideas are routinely rebranded into something more palatable for every generation. And the current DEI discourse is exactly that. DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, describes programs, policies, and practices that are designed to make environments, usually workplaces or educational institutions, more fair and welcoming to folks who have been historically excluded from those institutions. Think Black people, women, veterans, immigrants, folks with disabilities, queer people. I have my critiques of diversity, equity, and inclusion, mainly that, ironically, it poses no significant threats to the status quo, precisely because it is designed to uphold and serve the status quo. But to be abundantly clear, DEI is an objectively good thing, and the people who stand to benefit from it the most are the highly qualified professionals who would otherwise be overlooked by poor hiring and recruitment practices. The reality is that you wouldn't need DEI if workplaces were hiring based on merit and not nepotism in the first place. And yet, the federal government is taking steps to make DEI illegal. And all of this comes on the heels of a years-long effort to demonize diversity, equity, and inclusion programs as a handout for Black people, for women and queer folks. And this is where the modern slur comes into play. There was a time when DEI was simply the shorthand acronym for diversity, equity, and inclusion, a harmless descriptor. But DEI has become a word unto itself for these people. And that word is intended as a modern slur. Modern slurs serve two purposes, but before I share those, I think this is a good time to tell you about today's sponsor.
We don't need that commercial stuff.
Okay, back to the video. Modern slurs serve two purposes. First, they give plausible deniability to bigots. For many folks, especially those in the media, the N-word is this uncrossable line in the sand on the beach of racist slurs. Do something racist plus say the N-word and you are a clear-cut bigot. Do something racist and you didn't say the N-word and things are debatable. Modern slurs do the work of approximating the denigrating power of the N-word without the user ever having to say the N-word, thus allowing them to speak with dog whistle clarity to their group, aka the people who know what they're really saying, while providing just enough deniability against the accusations of people who intrinsically know what they mean. This is what Dr. Ian Haney Lopez describes as dog whistle politics, a way for politicians and public figures to signal to their base while maintaining just enough distance to deny accusations of bigotry.
Dog whistle politics? What's that? Let me give you some examples. Perhaps the most infamous example is Ronald Reagan campaigning in 1980 and complaining about welfare queens. Now, welfare queen, the term doesn't mention race on its surface. It's code. Nevertheless, the term conjures race. It conjures race in terms of the image of a poor African-American woman abusing the welfare system. And
like how black people like to call each other kings and queens, right? He was ahead of the game. He was calling them welfare queens back in the day. That's
conjures
crazy.
race in terms of who's being abused. The taxpayers, who implicitly are white.
Okay, so that's purpose number one of modern slurs, deniability. But purpose number two, I think, is more sinister and more important. Modern slurs trick well-meaning moderates into normalizing the language of bigotry. When I say that modern slurs are designed to trick well-meaning moderates into participating in bigotry, this is what I mean. When Trump and the far right says DEI or CRT or woke as a pejorative, they mean there are no doubt a couple of other slurs that I think could be swapped in for this one, but let's keep it simple. When they get you to say DEI as a pejorative, they know that you may or may not mean but it doesn't matter because they mean it as a slur, and they've already done the work to closely associate the term DEI with the idea of undeserving black people or undeserving women or queer people. So you are knowingly or unknowingly helping to normalize their framing of the term. I actually saw a lot of this online just a couple of weeks ago during the Pete Hegseth confirmation. People were routinely calling him a DEI hire. And even if they meant it as a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing, I think in a way they were helping to normalize the right-wing framing of this term by essentially saying that this undeserving person was getting a job entirely because of their race and their gender. Modern slurs help racist ideas rebrand into something more palatable for every generation while maintaining the systems, roadblocks, stigmas, and assumptions that keep society unequal. Historical examples truly abound. When the institution of slavery was no longer fashionable, it was rebranded into a colorblind justice system, where slavery was given a convenient loophole in the 13th Amendment, except as a punishment for crime. In key ways, America swapped the yucky term slave for the more acceptable term criminal, and black bodies have been over-criminalized ever since, allowing the country to celebrate the moral high ground of emancipation while simply engaging in slavery by another name. Going forward 100 years after the Civil Rights Movement, Jim Crow terrorism was rebranded into more palatable terms like the war on crime and gerrymandering. But what was the war on crime? It was state-sanctioned violence against black people predominantly, but marginalized communities more broadly. What is gerrymandering, except for the dilution and disenfranchisement of people's votes, usually black people? We use these terms not because they mean something different from the very injustices that people like MLK and Medgar Evers were fighting against. We use them because they are more palatable. They don't make us feel bad, and more importantly, they don't make us look like bad people. Today, the terms woke and DEI and CRT are being used to train a brand new generation into devaluing the ideas and social contributions and presence of black people specifically and marginalized groups more broadly. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned that we talk about the rise and hopefully the fall of the modern slur. And I mentioned the fall because I think that there is a solution to this problem. Truthfully, I think it's very simple. Only use these terms when you intend to convey their original meaning. Right. When you say CRT, mean a complex academic and legal framework designed to interrogate the role of race and racism in society and policy. When you say wokeness, do so as a way to express an awareness that systems of marginalization are everywhere and affect everything, and we can't afford to sleep while our rights are being compromised. When you say DEI, mean diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mean anti-segregation. Mean that your workplace or university has been a historically white and male institution, and that interrupting that trend is a good thing. What I'm saying is disrupt the way that bigots are co-opting language and creating new slurs by any means necessary.
And see, I've said this a lot myself, that the right likes to break words. They like to take words and change their meaning and make it hard for us to communicate. They do it with leftist words, they do it with racist words. Like communism is communityism. It's not a bad thing, it's the way we should want. Like, I don't know, like capitalism is the same as fascism, is the same as imperialism, it's the same as monarchy. It's the same as feudalism. It's the few ruling the many. Like, they just change the words, act like they're changing the system, and you get a little more freedom, they say, or whatnot, but you don't. Like you said, they changed slavery into criminality, right? They just made the 13th Amendment. Slavery is illegal unless you're a criminal. And even back then, they made vagrancy criminal law, right? So if you were a slave and you got freed, you didn't have nowhere to go because they didn't give you your 40 acres and a mule, right? So you were a vagrant. And now if you didn't have a place to stay, being a vagrant is illegal. You just go to jail now and become a slave. So, yep, I just wanted to go over that, like how the right, they like to break words, change words, don't let them do it. Like he said, use the words correctly. If you say woke, mean what we meant when we said woke. If you say CRT, it's about education. DEI, it's about giving people opportunity. And it's about giving qualified people opportunity. You don't just go get some black dude or some black woman and say, hey, go fly this plane. Back in the day, there'd be qualified black people and they wouldn't get an opportunity. Now you still have to be qualified, but they give black people opportunity too. So, yep, use words correctly or don't use them at all, really. And you would know a lot of this stuff if you got your news from across the spectrum.